It's the Growing for Market podcast.
There's a word out there that was apparently the word of the year in 2023. It was called enshittification. You look it up, and it's about how platforms go from serving the customers first to then serving the advertisers to then serving the shareholders. And it's a standard practice, right? That goes, and so to begin with, you're the most important person. You know, Facebook was in all these places, you're the most important person. And then once we've got critical mass, now you're the product. And now the advertisers are the most important person. And then once we've got all that, now the shareholders are the most important person. And that's what if we're going to build a long-term viable, sustainable food system, we've got to put structures in place to prevent that sort of thing from happening.
Hello, and welcome to the Growing for Market podcast, where we talk about growing, marketing, and the business of growing vegetables and flowers for local markets like farmers markets, CSAs, farm stands, and local wholesaling. I'm Andrew Mefford, your host and the editor of Growing for Market magazine for 34 years, the magazine for flower and vegetable market farmers. If you're enjoying the podcast, just wait till you see the magazine. Go to growingformarket.com for more. Also, if you could give us a follow and a rating, it really helps other like-minded people find the podcast. And now, let's take a minute to hear from our sponsors. It's with their generous support that we can bring you the podcast for free. Your soil is your most steadfast partner, an asset worthy of investing in. Since 1972, Ohio Earth Food has been the go-to source for high-performing and cost-effective granular and liquid fertilizers, seed-starting soils, and foliar sprays, all approved for use on organic farms. They deliver them right to your farm, too. Don't count on luck this year. Start your seeds in the Seed Catapult potting soil with mycorrhizae and put their Revita fertilizers in the soil before you plant. And rest assured that your plants will have all of the nutrients, stimulants, and energy for whatever comes their way. These natural blends utilize compost, kelp, and humates and are low salt index safe for high tunnels. Feed your soil and let your soil feed the plants. Visit them at ohioearthfood.com. Now with branches in Ohio and Wisconsin. ohioearthfood.com. Today, we have the pleasure of welcoming Pete Russell to the Growing for Market podcast. Pete is the founder of Ooooby. That's 4 O's before the BY. It stands for Out of Our Own Backyard, and it's a new way for farmers to sell to the public online. Pete did a TED Talk through TEDx Auckland, which is available on YouTube with a lot of the background on why and how he started Ooooby, which is really interesting, and I recommend to listeners for the full backstory. And hopefully today we can get into what Ooooby is today and what it means for farmers and local food systems. So without further ado, welcome to the Growing for Market podcast, Pete.
Well, thank you very much, Andrew. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, me too. Just because between your TED Talk and the little bit of homework that I tried to do to be informed for this conversation, it seems like a really interesting model and a little different from the other ways that farmers do have to sell online. And so just to start us off, can you tell us what Ooooby is and what the name means?
Sure, absolutely. So Ooooby is an online platform for small farms to sell direct to their local communities. You know, what it stands for is Out of Our Own Backyard. So it's 4 O's of being away, a bit of a quirky name. But the idea of Ooooby is that we can feed ourselves out of our own backyards. We don't need to go and rely on large corporate supply chains and so on. And so the idea is about standing on our own 2 feet in our own backyards and taking responsibility for being able to feed ourselves and feed our local communities. We started out actually being a food hub ourselves. I'm from Australia originally, but we had some food hubs in New Zealand and Australia that we were running ourselves, and we built the software to run our own operations, and that is supplying food that was grown by local small-scale farms around Sydney and Auckland and Christchurch, and then delivering them to local homes. And that's how we built the software. We built it for ourselves, and we ran it like that for 9 years. And iteratively over the time, just kept improving it. That's how the software platform has evolved to the point where we then started to make it available for small farms and food hubs to run their own operations from.
Okay, so it's already had years of use on the back end to sort of work out the kinks. I can imagine that there are probably a lot of changes that you made in year one and year two.
Oh, absolutely.
Out of curiosity, did you, when you started it, was the idea to be the software for your own the hub, like you said, or was the idea always to get it running and then make it available to other people?
The idea was to get it running and iron out all the bugs and make sure that it was actually a real solution for a real world situation.
Mm-hmm.
And then to make it available. And we thought it would take us about a year or 2 years to get it right. And then 9 years later, we were like, wow, we think it's pretty close now. But it's just, I think a lot of the people listening to this will understand that when you're running your own small scale food production and selling it to your own community, there are so many edge cases that come up. Like when you're dealing with large scale supply chains, it's very templated. You've got to follow exactly this protocol every step of the way. Otherwise, they won't deal with you. But when you're dealing with your own community, everyone's different. Every supply, is different. Your customers are different. There's all these quirky edge cases. And so that's what took us all the time to be able to build in the different scenarios that play out week after week so that we could reduce the amount of admin time that it took to be able to actually run, a profitable home delivery or pickup site type of service.
Yeah. There's a lot of moving parts. I know many years ago now, I worked for a farm that had a pretty large CSA at the time, and I know is even bigger. I think at the time they had about 350 CSA members, and they've grown. That was their whole idea was to be fairly big on the CSA scene, and I know they had to get custom made software at the time, which I know was really expensive, and so I can see how one of the values of something like Ooooby would be that it's I don't know if out of the box is the word, but basically like you don't have to assemble either a different payment processor, a different website, different CSA management software. My understanding, which I want to ask you more about in a second, is that Ooooby sort of like covers some of the bases that growers are probably using multiple different pieces of software for at the moment. But it seems like that's the value. It's something that in the pretty recent past, if people wanted something like this, they would have had to go talk to a developer and get it made itself. Whereas it seems, you tell me if I'm wrong about that, but you basically got the software developed, and once you got it where you're happy with it, and then you made it available to the public?
Yeah, absolutely. So you're exactly right. There's a couple of ways that people tend to go about it. You can get a developer and start working on your own custom software and then you discover there's this to do and then there's that to do, and it's a never-ending process of development. The other way of doing it is by cobbling together a bunch of different off-the-shelf products. So you'll get Shopify, and you get a plugin for handling the subscription side. You might get a route optimizing software. You might get some email software and cobble it all together. But what we've done with Ooooby is we've said we really understand deeply this specific business model, right? And that is the business model of selling from small scale farms direct to their community. And so we built the software to do all those things in one piece of software, so that you've got one login and it handles all your sales, it handles all the transactions, it handles all the customer relationship management side of things. It gives you all the logistical information you need to know to be able to produce harvest lists and everything you need to be able to fulfill every function from the gate to the plate, basically. And, there are always ways you can extend on the software by using other applications, but the bulk of what you need to do to run your business is built into the software.
Yeah, well, that's what it seemed like, and I'm not sure if I even have the complete picture. So that's what I want to ask you about. But it seemed like, from my research, it seemed like you will. It's not even make a website, is that right? It's people go if a farm gets signed up with you, people are going to buy through Ooooby.
They buy through their own. What it does is the system has got a front end sort of e-commerce shop, kind of like a Shopify.
Uh-huh.
It's similar to Shopify in that regard. And so you create it, what we can do is we can customize it to your look and feel, in the sense that you've got your own logo, you've got your own images, you've got your own content, written content, and so on. You put your own products up there and you tell your story. You can add your videos. And so it's like a sort of a templated website that they can put their own content into. But it's you with your farm selling direct to your customers. Ooooby is in the background. It's not, people aren't going to Ooooby to buy your food. They're going to you to buy your food. And what we do is just provide the digital infrastructure for you to be able to present yourself to your community.
Okay, so they go to suchandsuchfarm.com or whatever the name is. Is it the kind of thing where if somebody clicks on, say, shop or sign up for a CSA box, then the store function is handled by Ooooby?
Yeah, there's options. You can have Ooooby, the Ooooby website cater for your whole online presence, or you can have your own website, which you've created somewhere else that tells more of your specific story. And then you can just have a link, have a button that says shop or order here or whatever, and it can flick across to your instance on the Ooooby platform. So either way. And we have both. We have farms and food hubs doing both.
Okay, so the farmer handles their website. You essentially give them an online store in some function or another. And you also handle payment processor, right? Because that's one thing that a lot of farmers would have as a separate a la carte piece of software. They would have like Square or Stripe or something. Yeah, something like exactly. That. So you give them a store, you give them the payment processing. It looks like on the back end, you help them make like a pick ticket, like pick lists. I'm thinking like a weekly, it'll spit out because the orders are coming through Ooooby, it'll spit out, you need to
what
harvest.
Your requirements are. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, so that right. Am I missing anything?
The other one is that it will produce your packing labels and your packing manifests, or box labels, if you like, that you can stick on the box, which will tell you which customer you're fulfilling for, and all the products that are going into that box. So it's very easy to pack. It can organize those labels in the order of, you can organize them for optimizing for optimal packing processes, right? So it streamlines your packing process. But then also the labels are organized in a way that is very easy to know the order to load them into the delivery vehicle, right? So that you can put them in first in, last out. And then it'll also optimize your delivery route, so that you don't need to figure out, well, who am I going to deliver to first, second, third, or fourth? It will figure that out for you and put them into that order. And you know that you're driving the least amount of distance and the least amount of time to be able to do all your deliveries. It'll also handle like what we call drop sites or collection points, where customers, when they're signing up, they can opt for home delivery if you deliver to their zone, to their area. Or if you don't deliver to their area, you can create collection points that they can select. So there's so many different variations on the ways that you can set it up, but it's all designed to streamline and cut the time out of all the sort of the cognitive load out of just coordinating this type of operation.
Yeah. Well, I can see how, especially if somebody were getting started from the ground up, it would save them from having to get all those different components to sort of like put together an online store. And there probably are efficiencies that come from sort of bundling everything together instead of having to get a website from this or web store from one place and a payment processor from another place and the other things.
And the other, that's true. The other point is really interesting is, firstly, it saves you a lot of time. Like an example I refer to often is Louise, who works with us now. She was doing the admin work for a farm that was selling direct here in England, and she had 4 days a week of work. When they moved across to Ooooby, it went down to 4 hours a week. And that was a problem for her. It was like, I don't have a job anymore. But fortunately, she works with us now. But so it can have quite a dramatic effect in terms of the amount of administration that is being the time that's taken into administration. And then the other thing that's really interesting is that often when you cobble together lots of different bits of technology, somebody needs to really understand how that all connects together. And you've usually got one person who really, only one person who really knows how it all stitches together. And if that person isn't available for any reason, it's a real vulnerability for your business. Whereas with Ooooby, it's all in one place. It's all one sort of login. There's support documentation and there's our support so that anyone can kind of step into the control seat and say, right, how am I going to run this? And it's one place to run it. So that's another good part of it, is that it means you've got sort of a more sort of redundancy built in for if your key person is not available.
Yeah. Well, that's brilliant because, as you know, small farmers end up wearing so many hats. And a lot of times, let's just say not every single small farmer is a good tech person. And so, on these businesses, I think oftentimes the farmer ends up being the tech person by default. And so I think that's huge, not to have to be the tech person, to have somebody who can figure out how to put all these things together.
Yeah, exactly.
And now let's take a minute to hear from our sponsors. It's with their generous support that we can bring you the podcast for free. I don't know about you, but I got into farming to grow food, not to spend my time creating pack lists, writing newsletters, responding to emails, or maintaining web stores. If I could spend less time on my phone and computer and more time farming, that would be a win. Enter Farmhand. Farmhand is the only all-in-one virtual assistant built by and for CSA farmers. It takes care of the admin, managing orders, customer communications, and automating tedious tasks so you can get back to doing what you love. On average, Farmhand saves CSA farmers 6 hours a week. That's 6 hours you could spend with your family, out in the field, or simply taking a breather. So, what would you do with an extra 6 hours? Now's the time to get your systems ready for next season. Learn how Farmhand can help at farmhand.partners/GFM. That's farmhand.partners/GFM. I am so excited to welcome Bootstrap Farmer as a sponsor of the podcast. I've known them for a dozen years, and if anyone tells you nothing is made in the USA anymore, well, they're headquartered and warehoused in Paris, Texas. They make their own all-metal, all-inclusive greenhouse frames of steel made in the USA and fabricated in Texas, and their heavy-duty, reusable propagation and microgreens trays are Midwest-made. With a complete range of supplies, they have just about everything for propagation and growing, including heat mats, ground cover, frost blankets, silage tarps, irrigation, and trellising. Want to color code your seed starting flats? They've got heavy-duty trays that will last for years in a full range of colors. Great for keeping farm seedlings separate from retail or just for fun. And they have an experienced team of growers to support everything they sell. If you've heard of the NRCS High Tunnel Initiative providing grants for hoop houses, but have been put off by the paperwork, Bootstrap Farmer has a guide that will walk you through the application process so you can get your hoop house funded this winter. For all that and more, check out Bootstrap Farmer at bootstrapfarmer.com. And now, back to the show. Okay, so I know Ooooby is up and running. It looked like you have a lot of farms in the UK. And is it in Australia and New Zealand? Or basically, tell me a bit about where the Ooooby users are right now.
Great. Yeah. Well, I started out in Australia and New Zealand because that's where we started. But then I moved here to the UK. My wife is British. So we moved here. And this is where the UK is where most of the hubs are. So we call them hubs, even though most of them are actually farms that are selling their own produce. We refer to them as hubs because they often buy in from neighbouring farms or local bakeries and so on to aggregate a range of product for their customers. So yeah, there's over 100 hubs running on the platform now. It's facilitating, well, close to 10 million pounds, UK pounds. What would you call that? Around about, I don't know, $12, $15 million worth of trade across that range of hubs. But now that what we've done is made it more location agnostic. So now there's hubs in Ireland, there's hubs in Denmark, Poland, United States, in Canada, even some of the Channel Isles in between England and France, there's hubs. So it's taken off here in the UK, but we're not UK, centric, so to speak. We're actually sort of agnostic about where we are. We're all humans. We all need to eat. We all value good quality, fresh food that's being grown with respect. And so it just happens that the UK is where it's kind of sprouted and taken off first.
And You said you have a few farms that are starting to use Ooooby here in North America. So, most of our listeners are in the United States or Canada, but everywhere. So I'm thinking, so you have some presence in North America?
I think, well, we only just started making the software available in North America just a couple of months ago. So we've really new in North America, except that I've got to say, back in 2000 and I think it was 15, we actually were working with Tom Willie in Fresno, and that was way back in the day. But since then, we've only just come back into the US market a couple of months ago.
Mm-hmm.
So I think so far there's 4 farms up and running, and we've got a few more in the pipeline that are in the process of setting up. But we're really a brand new offering in terms of this sort of product into the US and North America, Canada.
Okay, so if farmers in USA or Canada were listening to this and intrigued, they could call you up and see about getting onboarded?
They could just book a demo. Like if you go to the website, which is ooooby.com, there's a button, book a demo, a calendar thing pops up, and you just pick your slot and someone will have a call with you. It could be me, it could be Seb, it could be Sophia, it could be anyone. They'll sit down, they'll listen to what your current situation is, they'll show you the software inside out and answer any questions you have. And then if it looks like something that will work for you, it's just a matter of going ahead. We then book the first onboarding session, and we help you to set it up to make sure that it's optimized for success. There's most of the work you can do yourself. There's really good guides on setting it up yourself, but we're also there with a real person talking you through it and giving you suggestions about how to make it, to set it up to be as successful as possible. And then once you're up and running, you're away. You're trading. The orders come in, the money comes into your bank account. You go and do your deliveries, and then it just becomes a recurring cycle of trade.
Uh-huh. Okay, so the demo is almost like a first date. Sounds like you're making sure it's a good fit. I mean, I imagine you're making sure people will get out of Ooooby what they want to get out of it. And also, one of the interesting things about Ooooby to me was that you have producer requirements too. It seems like you're also making sure it's a good fit on your end. And so you can have that kind of first date and see if you guys want to keep going. Can you tell me a little bit about the producer requirements, right? Because you won't just onboard anybody.
That's right. So the Ooooby's purpose is to put small scale and ecologically sound food back at the heart of the food system. That's why we exist. And we believe that with the right kind of commerce technology or e-commerce technology, that's what will enable that to happen. But what's important to us is that we're supporting exactly that, small scale and ecologically sound. So ecologically sound doesn't mean you have to be certified organic necessarily, but you need to be demonstrating that you're practicing ecologically sound principles in your production, or that you're in some form of transition. That you've made some very public statement that you're transitioning toward a more ecologically sound practice. And we believe that the reason we do that is because if farms don't have the opportunity to be able to move toward a more ecologically sound process commercially, if they don't have a commercial opportunity to do that, then it's going to be very difficult to do that. So as long as they're moving in that direction, that's important. But it is built into our what we call the agreement, our hub agreement, that you agree to these ecologically sound practices. And mostly the people who are attracted to Ooooby and who come across Ooooby are already thinking along those lines. And so very rarely have we had to say, actually, you're not the right fit. But there have been times when we've said, look, this is not what we're about. We're not here just for you to be able to use a platform to sell mega scale conventional produce. That's not what we're here for.
Right, which makes a lot of sense for our audience. Our magazine isn't explicitly for organic growers, but I just know because most of the people in our audience are family farms, whatever their scale. I tend not to use small, medium, large because one person's small is someone else's large. But one of the main things is that most of our listeners are selling into a local audience, and they're raising their families on their farms, and so they're trying to practice some type of ecological agriculture, whatever that means to them. And so that's really encouraging to me that you've made this platform, just because, especially here in the United States, you may be familiar with the phrase "get big or get out." I mean, the U.S. Department of Agriculture was saying that to people for a while, and I feel like
It's madness.
they may not be saying that explicitly anymore, but it's still more or less the orientation. You know, if you look at what kind of agriculture gets the subsidies and the greatest amount of the money and all that kind of things here in the USA, I feel like for so long that the field has been tilted towards really large scale production agriculture with very little regard for the environment. It's going to be, you know, you're definitely, I think you're preaching to the choir with our audience, but they're still going to be glad to hear that, you know, there's somebody trying to make a platform with them in mind.
Yeah, exactly. And we've been doing that. We've had that position from day one. Like I think one of the important distinctions between Ooooby and a lot of the sort of software products out there that do similar things is that we began with the purpose of why we exist in mind right from day one. And that, yes, we did need to be, and we are, a commercially sensible enterprise. We need to be able to generate revenue and you know, continue to grow and hire more developers and things like that. But that's not why we're doing it. We're doing it because we believe that a better food system is possible, and that is made up of small scale. And small. When I say small scale, I agree. It's like there's a whole range of what small means. Small for a cattle ranch is very different to a small market garden, and is really more speaks to independent family, not corporate controlled. Right? Yeah, so that's why we exist. We exist to support that type of enterprise. And we know that there's enough people out there that are really interested and hungry for this type of food system to emerge that we've thrown our hat in the ring, and we're like, we're in for supporting that. We want to see that. We want to see that proliferate.
Yeah, I think that is obviously really important. Did you guys grow a lot during the pandemic?
Yeah, we did. Yeah, the pandemic was, you know, obviously, I think blindsided everyone. But one of the things that we noticed, or that happened for us, was the demand for people buying from local farms and food producers just went through the roof. And so a lot of those businesses that were used to dealing with, you know, 40, 50 customers, all of a sudden had 300-400 customers knocking at their door, and the systems that they had just couldn't cope. And so that definitely had a big impact on our growth. But also what it did is it forced people to try buying food online or buying food direct from their local farms where they otherwise never would have tried. And when they did it, they experienced it for the first time and went, oh, actually, that wasn't too bad. That was actually quite good. Because, I mean, I don't know if you've heard this, but a lot of people, the idea of buying online is like, I don't want someone else to choose my tomatoes, right? I want to be able to feel them. I want to be able to see them. And I don't want someone else to pick them for me. But when it actually happened and someone else was picking the tomatoes for you and putting them in your box, and it was the farmer that was doing it, who's proud of their tomatoes and wants to make sure you got the best tomatoes, you're like, wow, I couldn't have picked that tomato. That's an amazing one. And so people's experience of reality sort of overrode their imagination of that it wouldn't be any good. It was great. And so what we noticed over here was that a lot of the farms and food hubs over here grew like 4 times their normal size. And then after everything calmed down, we expected it to go back to, you know, their normal size again. But in our case, with the hubs on Ooooby, they didn't shrink all the way back down. They came down, but more down to like about 2 times what their original sales were. So that speaks to this idea of if you can deliver to your customer an experience, not only the food component where it tastes amazing, it's fresh, and it's got that whole backstory behind it, but also the whole shopping experience where they can go online really easily on their phone, they can pick and choose, and they can curate what they want, and it's all very seamless, it's all very intuitive, then they just stick around. And that's what we focus on. We focus on how can we maximize the number of customers who visit your web store to become a customer, or people who visit to become a customer. How do we maximize the length of time that they stay a customer? And how do we help to encourage them to increase the value of the orders they put in with you?
That's so important because how now a lot of grocery stores are doing online sales. And so obviously grocery stores are going to have a bit, a team to put together a good user experience. The way that most farmers don't have a tech guy, the grocery store has a tech guy who's making sure that the experience is good. And so in this case, it strikes me that you guys are the tech guys. You're the tech people putting together the user experience to make sure that it all works and it works well. Because it strikes me that online is a place that local farmers can compete with, say, grocery stores. Where most of the people here in the United States and in Canada, a lot of countries now get most of their food. It's harder to compete with a huge brick and mortar store.
Yeah,
and talk people out of like going to the farmer's market. And don't get me wrong, I love farmers markets. They're a staple for our customers. And my farm, we used to sell at farmers markets. We don't anymore. And I realized that it's just a hard sell. Like, most people are not going to go to the farmer's market. I think that's ideal. That's a great way to do it. But there's only a fraction of the population, and a small fraction at that, who's going to go out of their way to go to a farmer's market. And that's why I think there's a lot of promise with Ooooby and online sales, because I think there's a lot more people that are going to, tap an order into their phone than take time out of their Saturday or whatever to go down to a farmer's market. And, you can't beat that experience for the people. I'm not knocking farmers markets for the people who like that. It's great to get out there, see the producer and mingle with people. But there's just only a fraction of people that are going to do that, which also corresponds to the small fraction of food consumed, and flowers for that matter, that come from local sales. It's hard to get a handle on it. I talk to people like, well, how much of the food and flowers do you think are coming from local sales? And most people that I talk to here in North America think it's in the single digits, and probably in the low single digits at that, which is kind of discouraging. On the other hand, you can think of that's all market share that local farmers can take if they can figure out how to take it. So I think these online sales would be a big part of that strategy for taking it.
Absolutely. I think, this is, for all the issues that technology has brought to society, of which there's plenty, there's also a lot of opportunities that this sort of e-commerce or the online sales brings in terms of leveling the playing field. All right, the real estate, just like you mentioned before, you can't compete with a bricks and mortar because they've got these big buildings, they've got these big car parks, and they can control the real estate. The larger players control the real estate. Whereas the real estate the new real estate is that 16 inches of square of glass in your pocket, which you have just as much access to that glass as they do. If the customer wants you, they'll find you just as easily as they'll find them. And so it definitely levels the playing field. And it also complements things like farmers markets. There's no reason, and a lot of the farms that are running on Ooooby are also at farmers markets. And when they're at the farmers market, they're promoting to their customers, you can get midweek deliveries from us by shopping with us online, and then they can promote to their online customers, come and see us on the weekend at the farmers market. So they actually feed each other, because they've got a communication channel with people who otherwise wouldn't bother turning up to the farmer's market, who are like, you know what, we're going to go along. We've been eating this guy's food for the last however many months. Let's go and meet them, and we'll go to the farmer's market, we'll make a day of it. And so it actually can encourage that to lift.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Our farm over the years, partially because growing for market gets most of my time, our farm has transitioned into mostly a nursery business, which I give my wife full credit to. Right. We were kind of like partners in crime through the years that we were doing retail produce and things like that. And it's, our farm has transitioned into more of her nursery business. And I know she did the farmer's market almost more to advertise her plants. She'd sell them there, but also be like, hey, you can come up to the farm. So I would think people using Ooooby could be like, yeah, we're here. But if you realize, like, I think of like kids' soccer games, like there's so many reasons of like, there's people have things going that even if they really want to get to the farmer's market, sometimes they don't. And so you could say like, okay, maybe you're going to miss a whole season of farmers markets because you got soccer games on the morning, but you can still get us through Ooooby, and we can even deliver it to your house.
Exactly.
So yeah, I think that's a really important part of starting to reclaim some of that market share, which I'll confess, I did not see that coming. I'm not a tech guy. I feel like a lot of times technology tends to be used for consolidation and centralization. And so it's really exciting to me to be seeing technology being used for decentralization.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I did want to ask you, I know you go into this a lot in your TED Talk, but for those people who haven't seen it or aren't going to watch it, can you tell us a little bit about how you got the idea for Ooooby? I know in the TED Talk you said, I was part of the problem, and I encourage listeners to go listen to your TED Talk for the full story. But it strikes me that a lot of times it takes people working in an industry to understand it and how to change it. And I think that your story is one of those. So I'm trying to save you from having to repeat your whole TED Talk. But if you could tell us a bit about your background and how it led to you founding Ooooby, I think that would give people a good perspective for where you're coming from.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll go back a fair way, actually, and make it a quick story. But I grew up on a small holding, a small block of land in southwest of Sydney. We had chooks in the garden and geese and sheep and orchard and things
Chooks?
like chickens, chooks.
Oh,
chooks. Do you not have chooks? They're not called chooks.
We've had chickens, but I didn't know it was chooks. Well, what do they say about the British and Americans? Is there two countries divided by a common language? So maybe it's same thing with the Americans and Australians. Is we got some different languages. Okay, so I'm sorry to interrupt.
That's all right.
I've never heard that before. Actually, I love the Australian slang. It's
great.
I don't know. I guess the British people also probably hear all the weird words that we came up with in the United States and they're either chuckle or just shake their heads disapprovingly. But I'm sorry. I had never heard chooks. Didn't mean to interrupt your story, but I had to know. Okay, so grew up on a small holding. Go ahead.
And my mum was one of the first people to really get into permaculture. For those who don't know about permaculture, Bill Mollison, who was an Australian, he lived down in Tasmania, developed this understanding of working with nature and the ecosystems.
Oh yeah, I think a lot of people in our audience will know who Bill Mollison. He wrote the book with it's the big snake eating its tail or whatever on the front.
That's the one.
Yeah,
exactly.
I think a lot of people in our audience will know Bill Mollison.
Okay, so Mum and Bill Mollison were like pen pals. They would be writing to each other. This is way back in the late 80s. And so Mum was always experimenting with these ideas on our land. And that was when I was a kid. Then I grew up and left school, but I was always very entrepreneurial. And so I just got into business. And I kind of left this idea of nature and farming and food, all that behind. But I ended up getting into business and starting lots of businesses and being very entrepreneurial. And then I ended up in a business which we had up a wholesale patisserie where we were from scratch baking croissants and Danish and so forth and selling them through all these cafes, small local cafes around Sydney. But I was hungry for more. I was young and I was I reckon ambitious. And so we then thought, well, why don't we just buy the croissants and everything from Europe and then we can sell them to all the supermarkets. And we got pulled into this large-scale, long-haul supply chain sort of food distribution business. And it was very lucrative and it was amazing because there I was one day being a small-scale patisserie, running a small-scale patisserie. And the next day I was taking them out. I was out competing all these small ones because I had the big machine behind me. And I got to see firsthand how the asymmetry between the large scale and small scale, how powerful large scale was in order of just taking market share away. And I got to benefit from it, but there was something about it that just didn't work inside. And then we had the 2008 global financial crisis, which because we were paying in euros and there were exchange rate spikes and everything, the whole business capsized just for a little while. We were able to right the ship. We were able to get things back on track. But I had seen in that moment that our large-scale food systems were not built for troubled times. We're not built for disrupted social, ecological, economic situations. And I really, it was a time when my son was being born, and I was really thinking, what kind of food system does the world need going forward? Because I had a real sense that things weren't going to get easier over the next 20, 30 years, that there was an unraveling of things happening, and that we needed a more resilient food system. And so the idea of Ooooby was born out of that space. And then it was about experimenting. It was like, okay, Ooooby out of our own backyards. We want to help small scale producers to be able to reclaim market share. How do we do it? What's the business model? And we tried a few different options, using farmers markets and using kind of local shops, but we didn't quite get it. And then we hit on this whole home delivery online thing. And this is back in 2010 when e-commerce was still quite new, and it certainly wasn't being used very much for food. Like, it was great for books and for CDs and things like that, but no one was buying food online. But we thought, if we can crack it, if we can make it so that people can buy their food online easily, then maybe that's going to make it work for bringing small scale back to the heart of the food system. And if you remember, 2009 was the advent of the iPhone. And I remember at that time looking at the iPhone and thinking, you know what, that is the supermarket of the future.
Yeah.
That's how we're going to change things. And so that's what we've been focused on.
Yeah. Well, I'm old enough to remember when it seemed like a daring thing in a way, like to buy something online. Like I vaguely remember making my first online purchase and being sort of like, well, here goes. And like, I don't know if like, is my credit card number going to get stolen? And here we are, everybody's buying. I don't know what percentage of all the commerce has switched to online. Well, I live out here in the middle of nowhere in Maine, up close to the Canadian border. And we buy a lot of stuff that we might have gone to the store for in the past online, partially because we are in a very rural area. Population density is very low where we are. If we had to go, it's a drive, kind of a long way to get to most of the big stores, other than, obviously we got a grocery store in town, but a lot of things other than that you would buy on a day-to-day basis, they're 45 minutes or an hour or more away. And it's just more convenient to buy them online. So yeah, that's brilliant that here now, 15 years later, you've moved on to being able to sell the basics, which is, I know, something that the big guys want to get into too. Like, last I heard, I think that places like, at least here in the United States, Walmart and Amazon, I've read some interesting articles lately about how they've already gobbled up so much of the market share for so many of the hard goods that people buy. That's part of the reason that Amazon and Walmart are trying to move into groceries, because they're sort of like, we're already selling everybody everything else. And so if we're going to keep growing, like, what does everybody buy? Food. So, it's like, obviously they want your food dollar. So it's really exciting for me to see ways that local producers can compete, on the things that they should be selling, obviously we think people should be getting their food, rather than just, centralizing everything so that Walmart can make it cheaper so they can send more of that dollar back to headquarters as a profit.
Exactly. And that's the thing. A lot of people, when they think about online shopping, they think Amazon and, I don't want to do online shopping because that's kind of supporting the beast, But when you're doing your online shopping direct with your local producer, you're doing the exact opposite. You're really then part of the solution. And you're buying from them in ways that you otherwise wouldn't be able to buy from them. If they didn't have that option, you'd have to go to the supermarket, or you'd have to go to Amazon. And so this is about creating that option so that small scale and independent farms can compete. And they can compete in terms of customer experience, they compete in terms of price, and in terms of their brand values and what they stand for. They've got the platform to be able to do that. And I think what this kind of leans into as well is when we talk about putting small scale back at the heart of the food system, it's about putting independent families and independent businesses back in control of their own destiny and being, having their own agency and autonomy, and for them to be able to not be dependent on something that's going to then ultimately exploit them. I think what we've seen is a lot of farmers they started out, 40, 50, 80 years ago in quite a strong bargaining position, right, in the market. And over that time, their bargaining position has just reduced down to negligible status where they're getting pushed around. The goal is to get back into a position where you can decide what price you're going to sell for because you're collecting the full retail value of the product. And you're able to say no to people who are trying to push you down. But what you don't want to do is then become dependent on something else. So what we've done with Ooooby is we've recognized that as a software platform, yes, we're able to provide all this way for you to be able to get back up on your feet and regain independence and get into a really solid position. But you're still dependent on the platform. And then what would happen if we then went, oh, we're going to sell the platform? Amazon wants the platform. Amazon wants all those growers and all those customers, and they're going to offer us a nice deal. And before you know it, you're getting exploited again, right? Because then Amazon buys it, or it could be anyone who buys it, some private equity firm. And then slowly they start ratcheting the price of the platform fees up, and they start putting these restrictions on, and they start offering advantages to competitors that are bigger and so on. And you're back in the same position you were. So that's why the way we've structured Ooooby and the ownership of it is we're using a steward ownership model, right, where it's the users of the platform that ultimately gain the ownership of the platform, and they ultimately get the benefit of the success of the platform, and it can never be sold, right? And I think it's, for some people it's like, yeah, whatever, that doesn't really bother me. But if you really do think about it, knowing that the platform isn't something that's been built up to them being sold on, right, it really does make a difference to the long term of your business when you're running on, if you, whatever platform you choose to run your online service, your online business through, is something to think about. I don't know if there's a word out there that was apparently the word of the year in 2023. It was called enshittification. You look it up, and it's about how platforms go from serving the customers first to then serving the advertisers to then serving the shareholders. And it's a standard practice, right, that goes. And so to begin with, you're the most important person. Facebook was in all these places, you're the most important person. And then once we've got critical mass, now you're the product. And now the advertisers are the most important person. And then once we've got all that, now the shareholders are the most important person. And that's what if we're going to build a long-term viable, sustainable food system, we've got to put structures in place to prevent that sort of thing from happening.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. I had not heard that word before.
No.
Even though I was around in 2023. And I think that should be reassuring if people were going to use Ooooby, because that is right. That's a model that we've seen so many times before, is that you get in with a product or service and it's good, and then once they have a lot of customers, to tighten the screws or up the fees or whatever. And I did want to ask you about the steward ownership model. That's certainly not something that I had heard before looking into Ooooby. And so I'm going to go out on a limb and assume it's maybe not a household word for our listeners either. Could you just tell us a little bit about steward ownership?
Yeah, so steward ownership, it is what it means. It's that the platform is owned by stewards of the enterprise, as opposed to by shareholders that are wanting to extract from the enterprise. It's owned and controlled by people who are wanting to maximize the impact of the enterprise, right, in terms of its purpose. And so the idea of steward ownership came out of Europe. There's an organization called Purpose Foundation in Berlin, in Germany, who have coined the phrase, although I think it existed before that. And it's about an ownership model where it breaks out, normally as a shareholder, you have the rights to control a company, you have the rights to any rewards from the company, and you have the right to, if you want to sell or destroy the company. And so with steward ownership, what you do is it breaks those three sets of rights apart, and it says they don't all have to be in the same basket. So the stewards have the right to control and to steer the company in the direction that it needs to go. And then you can have a different group of people. In our case, it would be investors and the users and the employees, the team of the company, that have the rights to the rewards of the company, right? Any profits that it does generate. And then the right to sell or destroy gets locked away. It's not on the market. The company is never going to sell it to some other organization.
So Ooooby has to stay under private ownership, or
Yeah, exactly. It has
Okay.
it's where it now the only time it would possibly consider selling is if there was another company that was steward owned and had a similar regime set out, but that's not the intent at all. So what that does is it protects the users from exploitation. Okay, it protects them in the long run from exploitation, and it also means that the users of the platform, the farms and the hubs that are running on the platform, ultimately gain the benefit of the success, because the profits that are ultimately generated are redispersed among the user base, because it's the user base that generates the value on the platform, and it's the user base that should get the reward of that value in time, rather than the value of being generated from the platform then going and being siphoned off to a small group of shareholders that are not really that connected to the purpose of the enterprise.
right. Well, how does that work in practice if you say that the profits are distributed through the user base?
Yeah, so the way it works is we're in the final stages of sort of designing the mechanisms for it, but basically it's a token system where, as a user, as a farm, the more you trade on the platform, you're issued tokens over time and trade, you're issued tokens. And then when there is going to be a profit distribution, it's just the profit is distributed based on who the token holders.
Oh, cool.
Right. Mm-hmm. So the longer you've been running on the platform and the more tokens you've acquired, the higher proportion of the disbursement that will come to you. And it comes to you in the form of discounted platform fees. So it effectively offsets your cost of running on the platform. If it's wildly successful over time, then who knows? It may result in some form of payouts. But the main idea is that the cost of the platform is kept low, because any value that's after you've paid your normal platform fees and so forth, any value that's surplus gets circulated back in. And so it's and steward ownership isn't a foreign idea. Like, Patagonia, that's a steward ownership company. Bosch, I don't know if Bosch is a known name in the United States, but they do a lot of the sound systems and mechanical parts. That's steward owned. There's a lot of steward owned companies out there, but people aren't usually familiar with the ownership structure.
Right. Yeah, I think what I've heard more of is employee ownership, but it sounds like employee ownership is similar but not the same. It sounds like steward ownership is a little different.
Yeah, it's like employee ownership, but it includes the users. It's like employee and the users of the platform owning it together.
Yeah, that's okay. I think that puts a finer point on it.
Yeah. Another way of phrasing it would be to say user ownership. You, as a user of the platform, are a shared owner in the platform, similar to a cooperative. Right, similar to a cooperative, but a slightly different mechanism to a cooperative, and it allows for it's more suited to today's environment than when cooperatives were in traditional cooperatives sort of emerged.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting in itself, because I think we are starting to see some different models from steward ownership, B corporations, employee ownership, and things like that, where they're making it explicit that there has to be a social aspect to the business, or like the whole point isn't just to see how much profit can possibly be made, which like our listeners are mostly, I think they're either running farm businesses or want to be. We also don't want to demonize profit. I feel like profit is the modern version of making a surplus, right? Because especially in most farming cultures, you had a winter, there's some period, or maybe it's a really hot summer, there's some period where things aren't that productive. Farmers have always had to make a surplus, and you have to have a surplus to make it through the winter or the summer or whatever your unproductive time is. Because the only reason I say this is because so many people, I think, in our field are doing what they do more out of the love of it or lifestyle, that I feel like sometimes people are almost uncomfortable with making a profit. But as the steward of the magazine, in a way, I want people to realize that if they're going to stay in farming for the long haul, they have to make a profit. They have to make a living wage, because if they don't, they're going to go out of business or they're going to burn out. Right. So absolutely. I also want people to be fine with saying, like, we're doing a good thing. We're doing ecological agriculture. We should make a living wage and be okay. Profit is part of that. So
And, look, and I just want to make this very clear: is like I am absolutely all for profit, and I think, in fact, profit when you're talking about an independent business is an incredibly important aspect of it. Like if you can't work knowing that this is going to pay off for me, and all my efforts that I'm investing in this, I'm going to get a return that is as good, if and ideally a lot better than what I'm putting in. I want to get a return on my investment, and I want over time for this thing to be able to produce a nest egg where I can safely look after my family, and I'm responsible for the money that I make. I get that, and that's my belief. And I think that the challenge isn't about profit, capitalism or socialism. That's not the point. I am definitely a capitalist, right? The point is this: is when you're running an enterprise at a certain scale that involves an enormous amount of people, then you want to be mindful of extractive profit, right? Where you're not generating the value, you're just extracting it, right? And you're being exploitive. There's a scale component to this, right? And so the way we look at it is that we are for profit. Like Ooooby is a for-profit company, but we are for common profit. We are for the profit of the users of the platform. And so we will generate profit, and then we will recognize where did the value of that profit come from, and that the reward is attributed, commensurately. So that that's a really important point. Is we're not a social enterprise in the terms of, we got to make everything equal for everyone. Not at all. You work hard, you get paid well. You don't work, sorry, you don't get paid. But there's also a sensibility around, extractive, exploitative profit versus profit that's generated from putting in the hard yards that you earn.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I want our listeners to make a profit, stay in business, and have a good quality of life. I think it's just, there's so many examples now, and a lot of them are the bigger companies. I think I don't even need to give an example, but I feel like there's this model that people are used to of big industries privatizing the profits and socializing the drawbacks, whether that be pollution. I mean, pollution is one of the best examples out there. And so we need to be clear. It's not profit in itself. It's it's a certain kind of profit. It's profit without regard for any of the social and environmental benefits. So yeah, if you're making farmers more profitable, that's a great thing that you're doing.
And you can pretty much say that's our goal, is to make farmers more profitable.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And people can sell flowers through Ooooby, right? I'm asking, okay, because flower growers are, a staple of farmers markets here. They're a very important part of our demographic. That's what I thought, because I saw people obviously selling vegetables, and it looks like you have the different, almost like some shops and food hubs. There's some places that operate kind of like in a gray area between, I don't know, are they a store? Are they a food hub? But it sounds like, I just want to make sure people understand it's a very flexible platform.
It's a very flexible platform, and we're making it more flexible. Like at the heart of it, it's fresh produce, right? That's what we built it around, selling fresh produce. But then, of course, around that, you can add the whole range, your eggs and your bread and your milk and your cheeses, and a whole sort of farm shop range is sort of evolved around that. But now what we're working on is making it very customizable to certain business types. So maybe you're doing cut flowers, right? You just want to do your flowers on it. People love to subscribe to flowers. They want to know that every 2 weeks a new fresh batch of flowers turns up on their doorstep. So, or it could be that you're a micro dairy and you're just selling your milk. Right? It could be that you're a micro brewer, like a craft brewery, and you want people to be able to subscribe to regular deliveries of your amazing beers. Right? It could be that you're a small vineyard or winery. Any type of sort of ecologically sensible, independent type of business that is selling some sort of food or some sort of fresh item, like flowers or something like that, is what the platform's there for. It's about putting small scale back at the heart of the food system, but flowers it's not limited to that.
Yeah, well, that's really cool, because I know that a lot of flower growers are on Instagram, for example, to use that platform. And I know, I'm not sure how much or how many people are doing this now, but I know that some growers would actually sell through Instagram. The flowers very photogenic, right? You're like harvesting, you got a lot of something, so you take a picture of it, and maybe you work with florists and they follow your account and say like, here, I've got however many bunches of this. The inefficiency there, I'm thinking, comes, you're maybe getting messaged by random people, all kinds of different messages through Instagram. Whereas I can see how that would be an advantage to just say, I'm going to list these on, say, Ooooby, and then the orders come in, and I assume you can set quantities on Ooooby, right? If you have 20 bouquets or 20 bunches or something. Yeah. So you can say, you could even still advertise it on Instagram, but then say, here's my storefront, and people go, the nice thing about that is that you've got one place to go for orders. It's not like sorting out people who are just messaging you randomly on Instagram, like, right? Because then you got to get in there and look at all that stuff if you want to get all your orders for the perishable product, whether it be flowers or veg or anything like that. So
exactly, and the way that the Ooooby set up is that people can do one-off orders, no problem, but it encourages recurring orders. Like it really kind of biases towards someone saying, you know what, I'm going to get this regularly. And I'm going to set it up to get a regular delivery of this. And that's a really key part of what makes a model successful, is that it biases toward recurring orders from customers. And you will still get your customers that just buy once and you never see them again. But most of the customers stick around and continue to buy, which is a really important part of it.
Does it help get recurring orders simply because that's an option that people can say like, yeah, I'll have one a week? Or
it's suggestive. Like, so when they sign up for something, you need to select, am I going to get it weekly? Am I going to get it fortnightly? Or am I just going to get it once off? So it's the power of suggestion. I was like, I hadn't thought about getting it weekly. Well, come to think of it, actually, that would be a good idea. I will get it weekly, right? So it's just the power of suggestion, which shows that 80% of the customers who buy on Ooooby are recurring customers. 20% buy once, or they'll come back and they'll buy once again, and buy one and off again. But the best ones are the ones that say set and forget. Great. I want to get my bunch of flowers sent to my house every 2 weeks or every week or every month or whatever it is. I want to get my, like, bakeries is one of the new businesses that are coming onto Ooooby now, because especially the ones who do sourdough, they need to know in advance how much of the sourdough culture to prepare for making the sourdough. So now they're using Ooooby to be able to get their customers to be a subscriber for their regular sourdough orders. All right, so a customer will say, great, I want to get my sourdough on a Tuesday and a Thursday and a Saturday. And the baker knows, perfect, this is how much I've got to make. I'm not going to overproduce and I'm not going to underproduce. So there's all sorts of benefits in that whole recurring process that's built into the system, that if you don't have it, if it's not there and sort of if it's not being promoted, then a lot of customers will come once and then forget to come back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. Is there an option in Ooooby to turn off anything but recurring? What I'm thinking here is that for CSA, like CSA farms, where they're like offering, a veg box and they don't want one-offs, can they make only recurring products?
That's right. Yes, they can.
Okay, so people could essentially use Ooooby as their CSA software. That's probably what's already happening. I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah, there are definitely CSAs running on Ooooby. I mean, and there's variations too. There's, you've got your, I think there's a spectrum when it comes to CSAs on one end of the spectrum. That is, you've got to pay for the whole season up front, and you need to come every Sunday between 11 and 12 and collect your box, and you only get what we've harvested from the field in your box every week. And that's like a pure CSA. But then you've also got different levels of, like, okay, you can sign up for the whole year or the whole season up front and you'll get your boxes at this price, or you can sign up and commit, to getting a box every week, but you only pay for it on a week-to-week basis, right? So that the customer doesn't have to come up with this big lump sum of money to be able to get their weekly box. They can say, well, just take the money out of my bank account once a week, and I'll come and continue to pick my box up once a week. And then there's ones that say, you can have your CSA box, but you can also have the option of being able to add extras to your box. So from your phone, you can add an extra bunch of carrots and this and that, and so on. And then you can do things like exclusions if you want to. You don't have to. But these are all the sorts of things that the system will facilitate if that's something that you want to do.
Well, that's great, because that's one thing with thousands of small farms. They all have different products. They all have different ways they want to sell them. So it seems like customization is key. It's going to appeal to people, because that's one of the beauties.
Yeah, that's it. You can configure the system to work for your model within reason. It's not 100% customizable. I think this is one of the keys too, is that as we develop this software, we're developing it from a point of view of what have we learned by being in this game ourselves, because we built this for ourselves, because remember, we were the ones who were doing all the sales. So what have we learned from ourselves in terms of best practices, and what are we learning from all the other farms and food hubs that are running on the system in terms of identifying best practices, and how can we build those best practices into the system so that when you come onto Ooooby, you've got about the flexibility to be able to do things the way you do them, but also to be able to benefit from the way things are being done that are really successful and really work. Because you might be doing things that actually aren't that smart, right? But some things you might be doing that are really smart, but other things you've just not thought through. And so we work to get the software to reflect best practice operations that we learn from the user base.
Well, that makes sense, to not have to reinvent the wheel. If this has already been done, you've been using it yourself and learning from it all however many years. That's a benefit right there. It's not to be able to learn from that collective experience. Because I'm thinking of my own self, I'd be like, line up the payment processor, build a website. How am I going to track orders? And so it's like, you guys have been there and done that. So
yeah, a few times.
So what does it cost? What does it cost to either get signed up with Ooooby, or the bottom line, what is it costing growers to work with you?
Well, it's 1.9% of whatever you sell is the platform fee.
So really just flat.
It's just a flat fee, 1.9%. You can, as you get bigger, you can then opt to sort of pay a monthly subscription fee, which brings that percentage down, right? So that the cost, your cost will reduce as you put more volume through the platform. And then there is the Stripe card fee. So we work with Stripe, okay, but we've negotiated a rate with them. And so everything combined, if you go to ooooby.com and you go to the pricing page, it puts it all there for you. So it's 1.9% of payments, and then you've got your Stripe fees on top of that, which are, the Stripe fees are less than you would pay if you were to go to Stripe yourself.
Oh, because you guys it's like with volume or something, you're able to negotiate as a lower fee.
Because we've got that many hubs and farms running on the system, we're able to negotiate a lower fee, and then we can spread that across. So yeah, if you go to ooooby.com, go to the pricing page, that'll explain it to you. And then, of course, from there, you can just book a demo. One of us will show you around.
Cool. One other thing that I wanted to ask you about, I think I heard you interviewed on JM40er's podcast, and I think on there you mentioned that you would help with search engine optimization, SEO. Can you tell me a little bit about that? Because I know one other thing that's come up on this podcast before is that right now, if you put into Google search, like local food near me, it'll be like Walmart, like the local grocery store. And that's definitely a challenge, right? Is that small growers just don't have the pull and probably the expertise either to get themselves ranking on those kinds of things. So it seems like that's something that I should ask you about. How does that work?
It's interesting. It's kind of built into the platform because Ooooby's been around for a long time, and it's been in that whole local small scale food space for a long time. It's got a lot of Google juice, as they call it, right? So when a new farm or food hub sets up on the Ooooby platform, it benefits from that Google juice, which means that it's very quickly goes up into the top rankings, just because we got a lot of history, we got a lot of very clear examples that this is the space that we are focused on. And in the actual platform, there's a lot of keywords that we've been careful to make sure we get in there so that people, when they search for local food near me or, organic food boxes or whatever it is that they're, my local CSA or whatever, that Ooooby automatically has a lot of momentum in that space. It's got a lot of sort of carry. So yeah, that's one of the things we definitely notice is you'll have a small farm or CSA within a local region who is ranked third on the third page of Google. They come onto Ooooby, and within about 2 or 3 weeks, they're up in the top 3. And usually they end up in the first position after time, a bit more time. So yeah, that's definitely just a benefit of being on a common platform with others that are in your space. You get to sort of borrow each other's Google juice.
Okay. Well, that's something I know nothing about. I know because we've actually been working on our SEO here at Growing for Market. So luckily I have people helping me with that. So I'm glad to hear that somebody there understands that. Well, I've gotten to ask most of the questions that I had after doing my homework about Ooooby, but is there anything else that I should have asked you about or that you'd like to say about any of this before we let you go?
I guess all I'd really want to say is that there is a shift happening at the moment in terms of, I think humanity is going through a bit of a review of what is happening in the world, and stepping back into a position of taking responsibility. And what we're seeing is there are a lot more people who are waking up to the idea of producing their own food, producing food, for their local communities, and being able to make a living out of it. There is a phenomenon that's occurring, and I think that as more and more people start to wake up to the fact that the last 2 generations, the food system has been taking us as fools, I think. And slowly we've just been buying, the foods have been getting worse and worse and worse. And that not only is there a great opportunity of getting into food, into growing and producing and selling food, it's something that we need to do as a community, as a society. And that I think it's got an incredible future. Trading online has now reached what they call the inflection point of coming up to 10% of all the food that's being sold is being sold online. Once you hit that inflection point, it usually means that you're now into the early majority, and you can start to see a much more growth coming up. So I would just say that we're actually at the beginning of an emerging trend of decentralizing the food system, and to have hope. I think if you're getting into this space now and you're feeling like, yes, it's hard work, it's worth it, and I think it will pay off in the long run.
Yeah. Well, I sure hope you're right. I think the trend in a way is good. It can be demoralizing, like I was saying, I think it's probably in the single digits, the percentage of food and flowers that are coming from local producers, but the trend is good. Like if you look at the USDA here in the United States keeps track of the number of farmers markets, that number is way up over the last 20 years or so, 20 or 30 years. And it's actually, and it's leveling off. But, now that we're talking about it, maybe online sales is the thing that's going to keep that trend growing. Because I think, at least here, the 70s and 80s were really kind of a low water point for local food production. It's bad for everything. It's bad for the environment. I think it's bad for our health. There's an acronym. I don't know if you've heard this. I wouldn't be surprised if you had, but there's an acronym that we call the SAD, the Standard American Diet, SAD, which is, which I think a lot of is an effect of industrializing the food system, right? Because if you think about what they're subsidizing, they're subsidizing soy, corn, and what is all that stuff? It's basically like they're subsidizing the raw materials for junk food, right? And so I think the environment is hurting. It's not good for the people, and it's not good for the fabric of family farms, which we all saw, during the pandemic. I think that exposed in many ways how brittle the food system was, and that we would have a much more resilient food system if we could have a lot more local producers again. So yeah, that gets me excited. Like, it's demoralizing in one way to think of like where we are now, but it's also exciting to think it's like, let's be positive about it and think online commerce would be one of the solutions. So,
and there's an enormous amount of market share to reclaim.
yeah.
I mean, it was only 80 years ago or even 60 years ago that small scale and family farms had the bulk of the market and claimed the bulk of the market share. You know, the advent of supermarkets, they started to eat into that market share, and now they've got a dominant hold on it. But the pendulum's swinging the other way now. There is an enormous amount of market share to reclaim, and anyone in their right mind will always pick food that's grown locally and from a small farmer that's fresh and from someone they know, as long as the price is competitive and as long as it's as convenient and as long as they're aware of it. And so the upside going forward is enormous headroom for as many people as they want to get into this game and reclaim that market share back from the centralized, large-scale corporate food system.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the more we do it, the more they get into it, the better off we're all going to be.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course I agree with you, but I mean, that's a really good point. The consolidation happens so fast. I'm just going to tell you a really quick anecdote. I don't know if it'll even make the final cut, but you made me think about something. Is that my part of my family, my dad's side of the family, had a farm in Pennsylvania in the mid-Atlantic of the United States. And that's actually where we originally started our farm, on that family land. And my grandma was still alive when we started our farm, and she told us all kinds of stories about what it was like back in the day. And so she was probably talking about the 1930s or 1940s here, but she said that when they needed cash, they would take sacks of grain down to the miller and be like, trade some of the grain for cash, because I think they, not only was it the Great Depression, but also I think they did grow and produce a lot of their own food. I know they did, but it's like when they needed cash, it would be this direct transaction of grain to miller. They get the cash from the miller, and then of course the miller's selling the flour to the community. No iPhones yet. And so it seems like it just really struck me what you were saying about how quickly that centralization and industrialization occurred. But it can be really hard to see past the current situation. But that reminds me how dynamic the situation is. It's changed very rapidly to get us here.
Yeah, and how quickly it can change back or change forward into a new version of a decentralized system. It was decentralized, it's become centralized, and things go in cycles. It will, I believe in the next 30, 40 years that our food system will be predominantly decentralized because the technology will facilitate that and the market will demand that. And we're just in that early stage of that starting to occur. And, people listening to this podcast, one of the earlier sort of pioneering groups that are showing the way. And that I believe in, 10 and 20 years, it just will make a lot more sense to a lot more people because the price will be very competitive, the convenience will be very competitive, and of course, the story and the meaning behind the food will be way outstrip buying a pack of Doritos or a bottle of Coca-Cola. People were like, why would I eat that or drink that when I can have this? This has got way more brand value.
Yeah. Well, I sure hope so. And it's getting me excited about it. I enjoy talking with you because I think, it's a way forward for local agriculture. And I think you're right. Our current food system is so bad for the people, for the environment, for the climate that we have to find a better way forward. But it's not, it takes new solutions. And so it's really been a pleasure talking with you today, Pete, because it makes me think that we can continue to see the progress that we've seen some of in the past couple decades. So unless you have anything else to say, I've really enjoyed the conversation, but I do want to make sure and ask, how can people find Ooooby online or social media or wherever you want people to find you?
Yeah, well, first, thank you very much for today, Andrew. It's been a real pleasure chatting with you and being on the podcast. Best way to find Ooooby is, remember, it's 4 rows, so out of our own, and then BY, backyard or backyards. So ooooby.com. And if you go to ooooby.com, then the website has got the links to our socials. But yeah, I think we're at Ooooby HQ on Instagram. I think we're at Ooooby UK. I think I just go to the website, ooooby.com. and you'll find us there. And from there, you'll find everything.
All right, brilliant. Well, we'll put those links in the show notes too, of course. So
Yeah,
I'll make
great.
it easy for people, but we definitely wanted to make sure get it from the horse's mouth, as they say. So, all right. Well, thanks so much, Pete. Really enjoyed our conversation. Really enjoyed hearing about Ooooby, and best of luck with everything. Thanks for telling us about it.
Thanks, Andrew. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Growing for Market podcast. If you've been enjoying the show, please consider giving us a follow and a rating or a review. It really helps others find the podcast. For more tips and tricks from farmer to farmer, check out our magazine at growingformarket.com. Whether you're a commercial grower or just want to grow like one, subscribe to Growing for Market magazine for the nitty-gritty of growing, marketing, and the business of market farming. We publish 10 issues per year with articles written by experienced farmers on topics ranging from tools and techniques to farm business operations and marketing. If you've been listening to the Growing for Market podcast and haven't yet checked out Growing for Market magazine, we've made a change so you can try the magazine for free. We've added a free month to the beginning of all first-time subscriptions. Try out the digital or paper magazine for a month, and if it's not for you, cancel within 28 days and you'll never even get billed. All subscriptions get you a year of the magazine, plus 150 downloadable back issues from the last 15 years and over 1,700 archived articles. With digital subscriptions starting at just $39 a year, head on over to growingformarket.com and subscribe today to benefit from over 3 decades of writing by farmers, for farmers, in Growing for Market magazine.